Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to give you that shortcut, that insight into some really big ideas. And today, we are tackling something huge. The moment physics unified light, electricity, and magnetism.
It really is a pivotal moment. We're digging into James Clerk Maxwell's work in the 19th century. He looked at the known laws and basically said, hold on, something's missing here.
Right, it wasn't just about tidying up.
No, not at all. Our mission today is to see how just demanding mathematical consistency forced physics to evolve. We moved from thinking about simple static forces, like basic gravity or electrostatics.
Things that just sit there.
Exactly. To understanding the dynamics, the time-dependent behavior of fields. And this shift actually predicted things like radio waves, light itself. It changed everything.
So the big question we're chasing is, how does a charge, when it speeds up or slows down when it accelerates, do more than just create a local field?
Yeah.
How does it generate actual radiation that can cross the universe?
Yeah, what makes acceleration so special? Because before Maxwell, the picture was often forces acting instantly, action at a distance.
Like gravity, maybe? You just feel it.
Sort of, yeah. But electrodynamics forced us to deal with delay, with acceleration, and ultimately with the very nature of light.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
We should probably start with the basics, the stuff that was known before this big unification, the kind of forces people were used to.
Right, so think about those classic forces. Gravity between planets, or just the electrostatic push or pull between two charges that aren't moving.
Okay.
Their strength falls off really fast as you get further away. It follows what we call the inverse square law.
Meaning if you double the distance, the force gets 4 times weaker.
Precisely. We write it as proportional to 122s. That R is the distance. So the influence fades very quickly. Near the source, it's strong, but back off a bit and poof, it's much weaker.
That feels intuitive, like hearing someone shout it fades fast. But Maxwell found that wasn't the whole picture, especially when charges started moving.
That was the absolute crucial step. He realized that for the whole system of electricity and magnetism to work together consistently, especially with moving charges and changing currents, part of the field couldn't obey that inverse square law.
It had to break the rule.
Well, it had to have an additional component, a part of the electric and magnetic fields that falls off much, much more slowly. Specifically, he predicted it would fall off only as the inverse of the distance. Just $1.
Wait, just $1, not $1.02. That means, wow, that part of the field would reach much further, wouldn't it? It doesn't fade nearly as quickly.
Exactly. That seemingly small mathematical difference between 102 and $0 is the fundamental reason radiation can travel across vast distances. It's why we get radio signals, why we see light from stars. If everything fell off as 102/2, those signals would be far too weak to detect over cosmic scales.
So that dollar turn is the signature of radiation. And the force on a charge, it depends on both the electric field and the magnetic field, right?
That's the Lorentz force law, essentially. A charged shell moving with velocity math BFE feels a force math BFE, that's Tyler times the electric field math BFE law plus the cross product of its velocity and the magnetic field math BFE. So math BFE plus math BFE, both fields matter if the charge is moving.
Okay, and if there are lots of charges creating fields?
Simple superposition. You just add up all the individual math BFE fields and all the individual math BFP fields from every single charge. Vector addition, but still just adding them up.
Okay, seems manageable so far. But you mentioned a complication earlier.
Yeah.
The thing that really changes the game.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, much harder. The concept of delayed action. Fields don't change instantaneously everywhere.
Right. Things aren't instant. There's a speed limit.
The universe's speed limit, the speed of light, see it all. If a charge over here at point P wiggles or accelerates, the effect of that change, the ripple in the field, isn't felt over there at point P until some time has passed.
How much time?
Exactly the time it takes light to travel the distance between P and P. So the distance, let's call it $30, divided by $1, time delay is $3.
So like looking at a star, we see it not where it is right now, but where it was when the light left it, maybe thousands of years ago?
Precisely that. We're always observing the past state of the charge, dictated by this retarded distance or dollars. We see the charge as it was at time 2 RCR.
Wow. So the entire universe we observe is like a time-delayed recording.
In a very real sense, yes. And mathematically. This delay makes calculating the exact electric field math BFE from an arbitrarily moving charge incredibly complicated. You end up with this complex formula. The source material shows it with three main terms.
Okay.
One term looks like the old static field, depending on Lothrieser's. Another term depends on the velocity and also involves one term, but then there's a third term.
Let me guess, this is the important one.
This is the critical one for radiation. It depends on the acceleration of the charge, and crucially, it falls off only as $1.
Ah, there it is again.
Right.
The two-word term linked to acceleration.
That's the radiation field. Far away from the charge, those 1 and two terms, the static-like and velocity terms, they become negligible. They fade out too quickly.
But the acceleration term, the dollar-year dollar, persists. It carries the signal across space.
That's exactly it, which tells you something fundamental. To generate electromagnetic radiation that travels far, you must accelerate the charge. A charge moving at a constant velocity, no matter how fast, doesn't radiate in this way. It just carries its near field along with it.
Okay, that makes sense. Acceleration is the key. But I remember reading there's a directional aspect, too. It's not just that it accelerates, but how?
Very astute, yes. The strength of the radiation field you detect isn't just proportional to the acceleration itself, but specifically to the component of the acceleration that is perpendicular to your line of sight.
Perpendicular, so sideways.
Sideways relative to you, yes. If the charge accelerates directly towards you or directly away from you, that component of acceleration produces zero radiation in your direction.
So if I held a charge and shook it side to side, you detect the radiation. But if I shot it straight at you, accelerating as it went, you wouldn't see that acceleration radiation from the forward motion.
That's right. You'd see effects from the velocity term, perhaps. But the radiation field, the part that travels far, comes from that transverse, that sideways acceleration. It's like the sideways shake is what really disturbs the field lines in a way that makes them snap off and propagate as waves.
Which connects back beautifully to the delayed action. We see the light from a star that left maybe 500 years ago. We're detecting the result of some transverse jiggle that happened back then.
Transmitted faithfully across space at speed CZ$. It's quite a picture.
Okay, so accelerating charges, specifically the sideways component, creates radiation. How do we make that happen? How do we build something that radiates on purpose, like for radio?
Well, the simplest conceptual model, and it's very practical, is the dipole radiator. Think of an antenna.
Like the rabbit ears on an old TV.
Sort of, yeah. Or just two straight wires. You connect these wires to a high-frequency generator. This generator's job is to push electric charges rapidly up one wire and down the other, back and forth, over and over again.
So the charges are constantly changing direction, constantly accelerating.
Very rapidly. High frequency means lots of oscillations per second, so very high accelerations are involved. And it's this continuous rapid acceleration back and forth that generates the changing electric and magnetic fields.
And because of the acceleration and the dollar dependence, these fields don't just stay near the wires.
They detach. They propagate outwards as electromagnetic waves, radio waves in this case. That's fundamentally how radio transmission works. The antenna forces charges to accelerate, and that acceleration broadcasts the wave.
And the direction matters, right? You mentioned the perpendicular acceleration being key. How did that play out with an antenna?
So imagine a simple vertical antenna. The charges are accelerating up and down. According to the rule, where would the radiation be strongest?
Perpendicular to the acceleration, so out to the sides, horizontally.
Exactly. Outward along the horizontal plane. And where would it be weakest?
Along the line of acceleration.
Yeah.
So directly above or directly below the vertical antenna.
Perfect. Zero radiation intensity along the axis of the dipole, maximum intensity broadside to it. The electric field itself will oscillate vertically in that horizontal plane, perpendicular to the direction the wave is traveling. This geometry is fundamental to antenna design and signal reception.
Okay, that makes sense for one antenna. But what if we have, say, two antennas, two sources of radiation?
Now we get into the fascinating world of interference.
Which is just waves adding up, basically.
It's superposition again, applied to these propagating waves. If you have two sources, let's call them S1 and S2 emitting waves, the total electric field you measure at any point is simply the vector sum of the electric field wave arriving from S1 and the wave arriving from S2.
And sometimes they add up to make something bigger, sometimes they cancel out.
Precisely. It all depends on their relative phase when they arrive at your detector. Do the peaks arrive together, or does a peak from one arrive with a trough from the other?
And how can we get that difference in arrival time, that phase difference?
There are two main ways. The first is just geometry, what we call path difference. If your detector is physically closer to S1 than to S2, the wave from S1 gets there first. Simple distance creates a time delay, and thus a phase shift.
Makes sense. What's the other way?
We can deliberately introduce a delay at the source. We can engineer it so that the generator feeding antenna S2 starts its oscillation cycle a fraction of a second later than the generator feeding S1, a built-in delay.
Giving us control over the timing.
Exactly. So if the waves arrive perfectly in phase, maybe they traveled the same distance and had zero built-in delay, their electric fields add up. Peak meets peak. That's constructive interference, and you can get up to double the field strength, or 4 times the intensity.
And if they arrive exactly at a phase, 180 circle.
Then peak meets trough. The fields are equal and opposite, and they cancel each other out. Destructive interference. You get zero signal at that specific point.
But Feynman mentions another subtlety, right? Even if the timing is perfect for constructive interference, the geometry can still mess things up.
Yes, that's a great point. Remember, the radiation depends on the perpendicular component of acceleration relative to the observer. If you have two sources, S1 and S2, even if their signals arrive perfectly in phase time-wise, the direction of their effective accelerations, as seen from your location, might be such that their vector contributions cancel out.
So you could be at a spot where the waves arrive on time to add up, but they're oriented in such a way that they point in opposite directions and still give zero.
Exactly. The source material gives an example, I think figure 28-4, showing that for two dipoles oscillating in phase, the maximum combined signal isn't necessarily straight ahead, but might be off at an angle, like 45 degrees. That's where both the timing and the geometric projection of the fields work together for the strongest constructive effect. It's a mix of timing and geometry.
Wow, okay. So let's try and synthesize this. The whole journey started because physics needed to be consistent.
Right. Maxwell's insistence on consistency almost forced him to predict this new phenomenon, radiation.
And this radiation comes specifically from accelerating charges.
It's generated by acceleration, travels at Tyler series, and its defining characteristic far away is that it falls off slowly as war dollars.
And when you have multiple sources of these waves, they combine via superposition, leading to interference.
Constructive and destructive interference, governed by both path differences or engineered time delays, and these crucial geometric factors.
So what's the big takeaway for you listening? Why does this matter?
Well, these ideas aren't just abstract physics. The war-dollar fall-off, the need for acceleration interference. This is how radio works, how television signals travel, how your Wi-Fi connects, how light itself behaves. It's the fundamental machinery.
Every time you see light from a star or pick up a radio signal, you're directly experiencing the consequences of these principles derived over a century ago.
Absolutely. It's the physics of communication and indeed of sight itself.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. We've established that everything we detect, light, radio waves, it's all a delayed report from the past, telling us about charges that accelerated somewhere else, some time else. Given that, what does now really mean? Our perception of the present seems incredibly local, tied only to the reports that have managed to reach us so far across the cosmos. Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope unpacking Maxwell's synthesis and the nature of radiation gives you a powerful foundation.